Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Big Blue Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Volz, a freshman here at SUNY Fredonia. So today, a bit of a recap type of episode because a big part of what I've been talking about the last couple of shows is, of course, the NCAA basketball tournaments, which are now over. The women's tournament concluded on Sunday with LSU taking down Iowa, and then the men's tournament finished up on Monday night with UConn beating San Diego State. First to the Fredonia Sports. So Fredonia's baseball team, they were supposed to be playing at home against Allegheny College at 4 o'clock today. That game has been canceled. I understand we're going to have some storms rolling through here in about an hour or so. So that game this afternoon, which was slated for a 4 p.m. start at home against the Allegheny Gators, that game has been canceled. However, the Blue Devils are in action this weekend for 3 games against SUNY Cortland, Friday at 3 o'clock at SUNY Cortland, and then a doubleheader here, and that getting underway at noon. For women's lacrosse, it's been a few losses in a row. A close game yesterday, a 3-goal loss to Brockport in a home game yesterday. That dropped their overall season record to 5-7. They will be next in action on Friday at 4 p.m. when they host SUNY Cortland. I also wanted to mention, just give a quick shout out, that the Fredonia cheerleading squad is down in Daytona for the rest of this week and this weekend for the NCAA College Cheerleading Nationals. So obviously, best of luck to them as they compete. And their event begins, it's tomorrow, and the exact time, I believe it's 5:47 tomorrow, I think is the exact time that event is scheduled for. So best of luck to them. I know that a lot of their athletes have been really working very hard. And sometimes I think in a sports realm, I think that competitive cheer sometimes doesn't quite get the credit that it deserves. But those athletes, they work tremendously hard. I mean, I've seen some of the things that cheerleaders are able to do, and it's not anything that I would be able to do. It's not anything that I could even hope and pray to be able to do in a million years. So definitely best of luck to them this weekend as they compete for the NCAA College Nationals. That is down in Daytona, Florida, getting started tomorrow and then goes through Saturday. Track and field, their season just started last weekend as they had a meet at Slippery Rock University. They're back in action this Saturday, the men's and women's teams heading up to Henrietta, New York, up to RIT for a meet up there. And then after that, after their meet against RIT this Saturday, only 3 more on the schedule, according to Fredonia's Athletics website. They've got a meet April 15th and 16th at Bucknell University down in Pennsylvania. Then April 22nd at the University of Rochester. And then, according to this, they finished their regular season on April 29th against St. John Fisher. And then it's off to the SUNYAC Championships, which take place on May 5th and 6th. And then finally, for the spring sports, the Fredonia State softball team still looking for win number 2 on this season. They are 1-11. However, their most recent game, which was all the way back on March 17th down in Florida, was a win. They were supposed to have a home doubleheader to actually open up their play at home and open up their post-Florida play, I should say. That was postponed because of some inclement weather that ran through the area. And it was a slated doubleheader against Alfred, and that game was also postponed. They are scheduled to have a home doubleheader against Penn State Behrend on Thursday, which is to say tomorrow, which I am pretty sure is the makeup game from last Thursday. And then SUNYAC play opens for the softball team this Saturday, April 8th, as they have a home doubleheader against Buff State. And hopefully that weather can hold off for them. I think it's supposed to be relatively clear, not supposed to be super warm this weekend, but I think it's supposed to be relatively clear. So hopefully the softball and baseball teams can get some of their games in. That's kind of the tough part with spring sports is that a lot of times, more so than any other season, spring sports will usually they run into some bad weather, some storms. Spring, as anybody who has lived in Western New York could tell you, is a rather unpredictable season. It could be 70 degrees one day, which it has been today. It's been absolutely beautiful today. In case anybody's been outside, my goodness, I think it was 80 degrees at one point earlier, but then we're going to have some storms rolling through, and that should cool things off. But I'm no weatherman. I'm just the guy who's here to talk about sports, not necessarily the weather, although I do enjoy a good weather conversation. And if I'm being completely honest, it was always a childhood dream of mine to be a storm chaser one day. I always wanted to do that, but I don't think that my mother would be 100% on board with the idea of me being a storm chaser. But my dad and I always wanted to do it. We'd see these extreme storms, and we always wanted to be storm chasers, and my mom was like, absolutely not. Anyways, I'm going to take a short break, and then when I come back, I'm going to talk all about the Sabres and their tough loss last night to the Florida Panthers and what that means for their playoff chances moving forward. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in on the Big Blue Sports Podcast on the first show of April. Not too many more left until the semester is over. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in this afternoon. We'll be back in just a couple minutes to talk more sports.
I step up to the dance. Floating through a wicked storm, I'm headed for your shore. On the boat that won't sink, holding on to both oars. Doing time, what's my crime? Standing in your line, always at my turn now. I think I'll break it down somehow. So shake your head and take your bets, 'cause this ain't over yet. I don't care if I burn my desire. Oh, it's only fire. Stars that guide me on my way never see the light of day. The night is long, but this night is mine. And all the pain that led you there, to that island bound and bare, is no great match for the test of time. Floating through a wicked storm, I'm headed for your shore. On a boat that won't sink, holding on to both oars. But doing time, what's my crime? Standing in your line, always with my turn now. I think I'll break it down somehow. So shake your head and take your bets, 'cause this ain't over yet. I don't care if I burn, if I desire. Oh, it's only fire.
If you like to talk on the radio,
If a song can make you smile,
if you like to listen in stereo.
Up and down the county line.
Have we got the station for you? WCPS 88.9.
Alrighty, welcome back to Big Blue Sports Podcast. So last night, going into the game, I think that a lot of Sabres fans, most Sabres fans weren't really understating the importance of that game. I mean, just the feeling of this is the most important game that we've had in who knows how long, in probably the last 10 or 11 years. It was the most important game. It was a game that you felt like for their playoff chances, they needed to win. Not mathematically speaking, but I guess symbolically speaking. So the game last night, and I will be 100% honest, I didn't catch all of the game. It was a busy Tuesday night I was out, whatever. But, from what I did see, I don't think if anybody's calling into question the heart or the effort of the Sabres, I don't think that was the case last night. I think that, listen, Florida is they're a tough defensive team, right? I mean, they forecheck somewhat they have an aggressive forecheck. They are defensively, more often than not, they are a fundamentally sound hockey team, which is something that has been lacking with the Sabres. And it was Devon Levi making his second career start, his first road start. And again, I thought he looked really good. I thought he played a very good game. He led in 2. And again, we saw it in the Rangers game when he made his debut last Friday, and we kind of saw it here too, that the goals that Levi is letting up are they're like weird bad luck bounces. And I don't want to say I don't want to sound like I'm just doing nothing but making excuses, but it just was it was weird, almost unlucky bounces. Like Florida's first goal I saw. It was on a power play, which that's another point. I'll get to that in a second. But Aaron Ekblad had the puck, and he took the shot, and it hit the post, then came back off the post and bounced off of Devon Levi's goalie gear and rolled in behind him. That's just an unlucky bounce. I mean, because that was going to go posting out, it just so happened that where Levi was positioned, and it's not his fault. Sometimes you just give up sometimes you just have bad luck. He's seen that at the NHL level. And I hope for his sake it doesn't get his confidence down. I really did not feel like Devon Levi played a bad game at all. I think Devon Levi had another phenomenal game. And I think that you continue to see the way he's performing. I think that when he came up, first signed, last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever, and made his debut, I think it was okay, he's going to get in some games now. This is going to be great. And then next year he'll probably play the full season in Rochester. And then we can, get an NHL vet up here to play next season or maybe the season after that, because goalies do take a lot longer to develop. I don't know that you can justify not having Devon Levi in the NHL next year. And I understand that it's only after 2 starts. I don't want to jump the gun. I don't want to kind of basically, there's an old expression, don't put the cart before the horse. I don't want to do that because he's only played 2 NHL games. He's going to have some bad ones. It happens. It happens with all young goaltenders. It happens to goaltenders of all ages. But the way he is playing and the confidence that he carries himself with, I just don't think that you can really justify sending him down and playing him in Rochester next season. I think that right now, the way he's playing, he is earning his spot at the NHL level. And for anybody who might say, well, I don't know, he's only played 2 games, he needs more experience down in Rochester. It's okay, my thought on that is if he's ready to play in the NHL, why not? Like, why would you need to say, oh, no, we need to play him down in Rochester? If he's ready to play in the NHL, then he should be playing in the NHL. He is earning that right now, at least from what I can see. And the other three goaltenders, and this is not to get overly critical of them, but the other three goaltenders have really struggled at many points this season. I mean, you look at the numbers, especially, Ukko Pekka-Luukkonen's numbers, Eric Comrie's numbers. They're not the prettiest of numbers. And Craig Anderson's are not great either, although before Levi, I mean, he was the best one. So that becomes the question is, okay, what do you do in goal next year? I have a hard time believing that Craig Anderson is not going to retire. I mean, he's 41 years old. I cannot imagine that Craig Anderson is going to play another season in the NHL. And you look at the other two guys, Comrie's got a year left on his deal. Do you play Comrie down in Rochester? I'm not sure that he has a two-way contract, which for anybody who might not be fully aware of how contracts work, a two-way contract in the NHL basically means that you can be sent down to the AHL, which in Buffalo's case is Rochester, and you can basically be sent down and called up. If you have a one-way contract and the team sends you down, then you have to be placed on waivers, and every other team has a chance to claim you, and if nobody does, then you go to the American Hockey League. And there's a certain order to how waivers are done. All that sort of stuff factors in. But the question really is going to become, okay, if Levi has earned a spot in the NHL, are you really going to send out a 21, 22-year-old goaltender to play 60 games for you next season? I'm not so sure that that's the best idea either. I think that being in the NHL and being a team's number one goalie and playing 65 games are two very different things. I mean, I personally, how I would like to see it, I would like to see there be an NHL vet brought in, or if Luukkonen and Comrie are up to the challenge, wonderful. I would like to see, you have a solid, really good starter, and then have Levi play some games. Levi could maybe play 20, 30 games, but that way he's not the sole number one starter. And the other aspect of that is, okay, you look at some of the top teams in the NHL today, they don't necessarily have a defined starter and backup. Some of the top teams in the league, and this is something that on one of the more recent Sabres games, this is something that I think Dan Dunleavy and Rob Ray had talked about, was that a lot of your top teams in the NHL, they don't necessarily have a starter and a backup. They kind of have 1A and 1B. I looked at Boston as a really good example of this. They have both Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman. They don't have a defined starter and a defined backup, and that works very well for them. So I almost think the NHL might be shifting towards you don't have your one starting goal. And obviously there are your elite franchise goaltenders, Andrei Vasilevsky with Tampa Bay, Igor Shesterkin with the Rangers, Ilya Sorokin with the Islanders. Those guys are kind of your franchise goalies. But for other teams, franchise goalies are rare. And I think that Sabres fans were kind of spoiled they had Hasek back in the 90s, which I'm unfortunately too young to remember. And then we had Ryan Miller for, how many years? I mean, Miller was here for a while, and we were very fortunate to have some very good goaltender play. And that was a thing throughout Sabres franchise history, was very good goaltender play. I mean, you even go back to the 70s with, Roger Crozier and, Donnie Edwards and Desjardins and Dave Dryden too. And you had Grant Fury, you had Darren Poopa. I'm just thinking of all of these names. You had some really good goaltenders, and I'm probably forgetting a few. Marty Baron, of course. You can't forget about Marty, but that's the thing that I think that we as Sabres fans kind of grew to expect that, like, always, you could always count on your goaltending more often than not. You could count on your goaltending. And that's kind of been the frustrating part of this season, is that the goaltending has struggled at many times. And that you could draw that back at the end of the season as to, okay, why did this team miss the playoffs? They were one of the best offensive teams in the league. Why'd they miss it? You know, you go back and you look at that. So after, because it was a 2-1 loss last night, I kind of want to, I just want to look at, is it still possible for Buffalo to make the playoffs? The answer is yes. I mean, it is still possible. And that, I almost feel, is a victory in and of itself. I mean, the fact that it's April 5th and we're still saying that the Sabres, albeit slim, have chances to make the playoffs. That's something that we couldn't say for years. So if we look at the Eastern Conference playoff picture, Buffalo right now is the second team out in the Eastern Conference. They have 81 points with 6 games left to play. The teams ahead of them are as follows. You've got Pittsburgh, who is the first team out. They're right ahead of Buffalo. Pittsburgh is 5 points ahead of the Sabres. They have 86 points. And Pittsburgh only has 4 games left. So from a Buffalo perspective, they're 5 points behind Pittsburgh, and the Sabres have 2 games in hand on them. The teams that are in, Buffalo is 6 points behind the New York. Actually, they're 6 points behind both Florida and the Islanders, and they have 2 games in hand on both of those teams. I'm not really so quick to say that the season is over because they have those games in hand. They still have opportunities, but there's just been too many times this season where some opportunities were not really maximized, and that could come back and haunt you as a reason why you didn't make the playoffs. And I know that playoffs were never an expectation going into this season. I mean, they've been better than most people expected they would be, you know, but I think that it's hard when you know that they could have made it if not for a handful of different things, like losing 8 games in a row back in November, or a few weeks ago losing, 8 of 9 or something like that. You know, and they've had some games where they've had leads and they haven't been able to hang on to them. You know, so I think that that's the type of stuff that could come back to hurt you. So the rest of the season, I mentioned Buffalo has 6 games left to play. Now, that's more games left than anybody in the entire Eastern Conference. Anybody in the entire league, actually. Most teams have 5 games or 4 games left. Buffalo has 6. That's because they had some, postponements, at least one, because of that storm that rolled through before Christmas. So out of the 6 games left, what realistically are we looking at in terms of wins, in terms of losses? So the next game is tomorrow night in Detroit against the Red Wings at 7 o'clock. Detroit is a team that is pretty much out of it. Mathematically, not quite, but they're more or less, they're out of it symbolically, I guess. That's a game that Buffalo could definitely win. I mean, they won in Detroit earlier this year. Then this Saturday, they play the Carolina Hurricanes at 12:30 in Buffalo. That's going to be a tough one. Carolina is very good. I mean, they were my preseason pick to win the Stanley Cup. I felt that Carolina had something special this year, and I know that with the injury to Andrei Svechnikov, it's kind of going to be a little more difficult for them, but I still think Carolina is a tough team. That's going to be a difficult game on Saturday, and with the Sabres struggles at home, they're really going to have to bring their A game in that one if they want to come away with 2 points. And then we get into next week. They have to finish the season with 4 games in 5 days. They have 2 back-to-backs. They play next Monday night, and 3 of them are on the road, too. They play next Monday night in Manhattan against the Rangers. Then next Tuesday, the night after that, they're in New Jersey for a game against the Devils. Then they have Wednesday off. And then on Thursday, this is a week from tomorrow I'm talking about, they have their regular season home finale as they face the Ottawa Senators. And then next Friday night, April 14th, is the regular season finale with the Sabres in Columbus against the Blue Jackets for a 7:30 start. And that game was postponed from the December Storm. The Ottawa game was supposed to be their regular season finale. But out of these 6 games, realistically, what do I think Buffalo will be able to pull off? Honestly, I don't see them beating Carolina. And I don't know as if I see them beating the Rangers or Devils either. I don't know. That the Rangers, maybe, but I don't know as if I see them beating New Jersey. That team's on a roll right now. Against Detroit tomorrow night, that's winnable for Buffalo. Against Ottawa, that one's also definitely winnable. And then against Columbus, that's one they should win. I mean, the last time they played Columbus was definitely not the best game for the Sabres. That was the one where it was in Buffalo and Columbus won. And that's another thing that I think could come back and hurt them. You know, the fact that they've struggled so much at home. But no, the big problem that I noticed last night was penalties. They couldn't stay out of the box. I mean, I actually think that I lost count of how many times the Sabres were in the penalty box last night. Like, it was just like really, you don't need to take that many penalties. It just, I didn't. Yeah, they had what, 1, 2, 3, 4. They had 3 penalties in the first period. Like, you're not that. That is not what smart teams do. And I'm not saying the Sabres are a dumb team. But that's not what teams do and end up winning. You don't take that many penalties and expect to win every night. You know, you've got to play a clean game. You've got to stay out of the box. And I just think that sometimes the Sabres try a little too hard to make the, you know, I guess they get a little too cute is the best way I can describe it. You know, they make plays that it's almost like they're trying too hard and they're making things more difficult than they need to be. And I think that sometimes because they're so young, I almost wonder if they're not fully confident in themselves and their ability to succeed. It's like, you're very talented players. You know, I think that sometimes they get in their head a little bit and they kind of panic sometimes. And it's like, well, don't panic. Like, you know, and I think that it helps maybe to realize that, okay, the expectations aren't playoffs for this year, but how nice would that have been to be able to say that finally we've made the playoffs. Who cares what happens in the playoffs? If they get absolutely boat raced by the Bruins in the first round, so what? At least the playoff drought is over. I can remember saying that about the Bills when they ended their drought back in 2017. It was like, I remember feeling like part of me doesn't care if the Bills get blown out by Jacksonville. They made it. They're in. Finally, they're in the playoffs. And this long drought where you're just the laughingstock of the entire league is finally over. I mean, the Sabres have the longest playoff drought in NHL history. And I think it definitely hurts a little bit that knowing that they probably could have made it if a few things had gone differently. But at the same time, I think that I do not view this season as a failure whatsoever. They could lose each of their last 6 games by a score of like 10-1 in every game, and I would still think that this season was not a failure. I mean, this season, I think Sabres fans are starting to get some hope back. I think that it took a lot, and I think it's going to take a lot more to win back some of the fans that this organization has lost over the last handful of years. I mean, there have been so many fans since 2011 that have just said, you know what? I'm done with it. You know, because the team's bad and the organization is making moves and appearing like they don't really care about the fans. And I think that a lot of fans really felt that way. I mean, you remember a few years ago when Dwayne Steinel called into WGR and he went on his whole rant that ended up going viral and all that. And then they had a fan protest. And I mean, Sabres fans have been through some really dark times in the last decade plus. And I think there's a lot of fans that are feeling like, I think a lot of fans are kind of feeling like, why should I believe in this? Because I've been told that they're figuring it out and they're going to be good again. I've been told that several times and it's ended up not being true. So why should I believe it this time? And my response to that is that this team is so different than those other teams. It just feels different because they're not just, drafting a guy with a high draft pick or making a big free agent signing and saying, yep, this is going to be the piece that carries us to the promised land. You can't do that in team sports. And I think that we believed, back in 2015, I think we believed that Jack Eichel was going to be the savior. And he's a darn good player, and he was very loved in Buffalo. And, of course, everything happened with him. But, I think they expected him to be the savior. No one guy is going to rescue your franchise. That's not going to happen. Yeah, okay, you can have one really, really amazing player who can end up, I guess maybe bringing your team back to relevance. Like, look at what Ovechkin did in Washington, but he didn't do it alone. He had Nicholas Backstrom. He had, Braden Holtby and Ed. He had Mike Green on defense and John Carlson and all that. Like, Ovechkin didn't do it alone. He was amazing. Like Sidney Crosby, he didn't do it alone. He had Evgeny Malkin, Marc-Andre Fleury, and all those guys. Patrick Kane, he didn't do it alone. He had Jonathan Toews and all those other guys with the Blackhawks, Brent Seabrook, Duncan Keith, those guys. I think there's a common misconception that one player can turn around an entire franchise because more often than not, that's not the case. And it's not necessarily fair to that player either to put that much pressure on him. And I worried that Rasmus Dahlin was going to crumble under that, to be honest with you. I mean, you saw how the team played when Ralph Kruger was coaching. It wasn't pretty. I mean, it was, you play a 56-game season, you only win 15 games. It's not pretty. You lose 18 games in a row. And I don't want to hear anything about how, no, it was an 18-game winless streak because the overtime and shootout losses were actually technically ties. Don't give me that. Spare me that. They were losses. Come on. Like, I think that to the fans who are hesitant to come back, I think that this is the time for you to come back now because I think we've got a team here in Buffalo that is ready to do something special. And it's unfortunate that that couldn't quite happen this year, but there were some flashes shown. I mean, to the Sabres fans who kind of get down on the team and, talk about how, it's not gonna pan out. Remember how you felt when this team brought back the black and red jerseys and beat St. Louis that night. Remember how you felt on Ryan Miller night when Dylan Cousins scored the overtime winner. Remember how you felt in some of these games where they found ways to win and showed that they can be an exciting, fun team. I don't know. I think that this is a team that next year is gearing up to potentially do something special. And I'm really excited for that. And I'm excited to maybe possibly experience that. The last time the Sabres, and I mentioned it on the show, the last time the Sabres were in the playoffs, I was in first grade. I don't remember that super well. And as much as I would have loved to have seen playoffs this year, I'm just excited to see a team that wants to compete day in and day out, that is young, has a lot of potential, and looks like they might be primed to doing something really special in the future. And that, I think, is something that's really worth getting excited about. I think that that's really something that is just so exciting. I think there's really a great future ahead for the Sabres, and I can't wait to get that future started. So that's all about the Sabres. I'm just going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, I want to talk about the men's and women's basketball tournaments, and then we'll talk a little baseball and look at how things are going in that area so far. But yeah, I want to talk mainly about the national championships and kind of the recaps of the tournaments as a whole. So thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports Podcast this afternoon. Be back in just a couple minutes.
Like gravity is getting stronger. Something's pushing down on my shoulders, trying to flatten me out, leave me on the ground. Dreamt of standing in line last night, just queuing up in an unending line. Feeling grows. What feet are stuck in the thickest mud, trying to pull myself free from it, starting to feel that's a Sisyphean task.
Fredonia Radio Systems presents The Local Lowdown, the place to be to keep up with your local music scene. Featuring exclusive interviews and in-station performances, you can listen in on WCVF 88.9 or WDVL 89.5. You can also watch the show on the Fredonia Radio YouTube channel. We air every Thursday night, so tune in at 8 p.m. to catch the scoop with the Local Lowdown crew.
Alrighty, welcome back to Big Blue Sports Podcast. This day in Western New York sports history, April 5th, 2006, the Sabres beating the Ottawa Senators 5-4 in overtime. Daniel Briere scored the overtime winner. Chris Drury had a few points in that game. Rory Fitzpatrick scored a goal. When's the last time you heard that name? And Marty Biron was in net for the Sabres. A 5-4 overtime win. And then, of course, Buffalo in those playoffs would go on to knock out the Ottawa Senators in 5 games in the second round before losing to Carolina in the Eastern Conference Finals on that memorable run. Also, wanted to let you know that Writer's Ring here at Fredonia is a club of writers, anything from fantasy to poetry, from gothic literature to fan fiction, from mystery to nonfiction. Bring something to write with and learn about the ways of writing, meet special guests, and hang out with us in the Fenton Reading Room on Mondays from 7 to 8 p.m. So the Writer's Ring, a great opportunity for anybody here at Fredonia who is particularly interested in any type of writing. Speaking of writing, I, of course, wanted to bring up that a new issue of The Leader, which is Fredonia's student-run newspaper, was printed today, so everybody make sure you grab your copy of The Leader. It's just such a wonderful newspaper. They do a lot. They write a lot of great things, and I can't promote the campus media here at Fredonia enough, and know that it's not just because I also write for The Leader. Campus media here at Fredonia does a great job of reporting on all sorts of various topics, and really it's such a great outlet, and it's something that I think makes Fredonia very special. But enough talking about how, wonderful and perfect Fredonia is. Fredonia's great, but I wanted to dive into the NCAA championships. So it's always kind of sad when March Madness is over, because a lot of people, that's like their favorite time of the year. It's one of mine too. I mean, I'll flat out tell you, 2 of my favorite days of the year are or I guess I should say, a few of my favorite days of the year are the round of 64. Those first round games in the men's and women's tournaments, when it's like there's like 4 games on all at one time, and you have like everything set up on the remote. Like, I've had times where I have like a game on the TV, and I'll have a game on my laptop, a game on my phone, and like I'll have a game on another TV in a different room, and I'll be running back and forth. And I love that so much. So in the men's tournament, of course, the Yukon Huskies winning their 5th national championship, which ties them for, I don't know where they are in standings. I know that they now have the same number of national championships as Duke and Indiana. So that's definitely, anytime you can get in conversation with Duke and Indiana for college basketball, that's pretty incredible. And I know that, Indiana definitely has had some struggles the last handful of years. They haven't been quite the same program in a while, but those are 2 very historic, very good programs. And to get your name in that conversation is absolutely incredible. UConn, honestly, was on a complete warpath in this tournament. I mean, they were on a mission from the start. So UConn started out as a 4 seed in the West, and in the first round, they beat Iona, who was a 13 seed, and the champions of the MAAC, 87-63. And of course, Rick Pitino ended up making the announcement not super long after that game that he was going to be leaving, and he is now the head coach at St. John's. In the round of 32, UConn matched up against, holy cow, if I can find it in my bracket here. I think I'm there it is. Wow, I lost it for a second. In the round of 32, UConn took on 5 seed St. Mary's and beat them 70-55. And again, I think that you really started noticing a trend with UConn. I almost said LSU. I'm mixing up my tournaments here. I think that you almost started to notice a trend where the game UConn was winning. They kept winning, and the games they were winning were not close. Like, they were just on an absolute tear. They were not close. In the Sweet 16, they matched up against 8 seed Arkansas, who was fresh off an upset over the top seed and defending national champions Kansas. And again, they flattened Arkansas 88-65. They got to the Elite Eight against 3 seed Gonzaga, 82-54. when you beat anybody by that much in the Elite Eight, you're a dangerous basketball team. So then in the Final Four last Saturday night, they played the five seed from the Midwest version, the Midwest version. I said version. Holy cow. Region. Wow. From the Midwest region, they beat the Hurricanes 72-59, and then in the championship, it was 76-59 over San Diego State. So they just, from the beginning of the tournament, it was like they won every game in the tournament by double digits. I mean, defensively, they're a shutdown team. I mean, how many games did they hold their opponent under 60 points? I mean, that's hard to do, to hold your opponent. They held all but two of their opponents on this run to under 60 points. They gave up 65 to Arkansas in the Sweet 16. That was the most. That's incredible. That's pretty wild. And San Diego State, they deserve a lot of credit. They had a great run too. They were playing against the College of Charleston, who was a 12 seed in the first round. That was a College of Charleston team that was really, really good. They were, I think, 31-3 in the regular season. I actually picked Charleston to win that game. My championship bracket did not work out. I had Houston beating Marquette. That did not end so well, obviously. And then San Diego State beat the College of Charleston 63-57 in the first round. They played the Furman Paladins, who were fresh off of their huge upset win over Virginia. And they beat Furman 75-52. Sweet 16, they knocked off the top overall seed Alabama Crimson Tide 71-64. In the Elite Eight, they beat 6th seed Creighton 57-56. Of course, that was a thriller of a game. In the Final Four, the game-winning shot, that buzzer beater to beat 9th seed FAU 72-71, which actually we could have seen history. We weren't far off from seeing history in that game, because if FAU had won that, they actually would have been the lowest seed to ever go to the national championship game. I mean, the lowest seed to go was an 8 seed. I know that Villanova did it in 85 and won. And if I can remember correctly, the other 8 seeds, I know Butler did it in 2011. They lost to UConn, and Kentucky did in 2014, and they lost to UConn, if my memory serves me correct. And then, of course, the national championship, San Diego State falls to UConn 76-59. So the men's bracket this year, my kind of final thought on the men's bracket was that there were so many upsets. It was unbelievable. I mean, we had a 9 seed playing in the Final Four. Our national championship matchup was a 4 versus 5. We had a 16 beat a 1 in the opening round. We had a 16 beat a 1, a 15 beat a 2, a 13 beat a 4. I mean, it was just like left and right. And the funny thing is, the big upset that usually happens, a 12 beating 5, that didn't happen. That honestly stunned me. Every single 5 seed won in the first round, which I can't tell you the last time that happened. That's surprising, because that's usually the one that pretty much everybody picks is, if a 12 is going to beat a 5, that's going to be the big upset. But no, it didn't happen this year. Instead, we had a 16 beat a 1 with FDU beating Purdue. We had a 15 beating a 2 when Arizona beat Princeton, and then Princeton won again. And Princeton got to the Sweet 16 as a 15 seed. And I just think that overall, it speaks to the level of parity that might be increasing within these tournaments, which is a good thing. And I worry about that not being the case anymore when things like NIL deals start to kind of dominate the college basketball world. I worry that that's not going to be the case. So that was kind of one final look at the men's tournament. I'm going to take just a quick break. And then when I come back, I'll recap the women's tournament. And then that'll be all for another episode of the Big Blue Sports Podcast. I want to thank absolutely everybody for tuning in, not just today, but every week. And I'll be right back. So thanks for tuning in this afternoon.
where the joyride ends. A perfect pace, and we're just around the corner where the street lights bend. And we can drive fast, steady pushing on the gas. I'll show you how to clear your head. No matter where we meet, the silly heartbeats. It reminds me of the night you said, look out your window, driving in a different town. Same street, same home. Buckle up so we can get speeding 72. We're faster getting nowhere. Maybe we can go there. Show you a secret out of the blue. Hear you burning my filter. Look how there's a fill there. Maybe on a Sunday, feeling up the ashtray. Nothing gets in our way. Always in a new place. To catch us all around, listening to both sounds. Keep me in your car. Keep me in your car.
Oh, hey, you hear that? It's WCVF 88.9, The Voice.
Welcome back to Big Blue Sports Podcast. So to wrap up this afternoon's show, I wanted to talk about the women's NCAA tournament. There's been a lot of talk about that lately. A thrilling national championship game as LSU beat Iowa 102-85. Caitlin Clark for Iowa was the big talk of the tournament for really a lot of it. I mean, she is one of the top players in not only the game today, but I'll be 100% honest, she's one of the best college women's basketball players that I've ever seen. I mean, she is just carving teams up, dropping 40 points in the tournament like it's nothing. And a lot was made about the kind of trash talk going on between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, who is the kind of star for LSU. You know, a lot was made about like, okay, you know, some people are kind of calling out Angel Reese and calling her a poor sport, you know, saying that she, you know, needs to be more respectful of her opponents and all that, and then letting, you know, Caitlin Clark letting that kind of slide. And some people were saying, you know, they both need to be better sports. Here's my view on that. My thought on it is your competitive athletes at that level. No, I would not personally have that level of like trash talk or whatever. You know, I was always kind of brought up, you know, you respect your opponents and all that. But I don't think that it was anything of like that they disrespected each other. I think Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese have tremendous respect for each other as competitors. You know, and I think Caitlin Clark even said that. She said that she has a great respect for Angel Reese. You know, it's just that in the heat of the moment, at that level especially, it a lot of times that can bring out your competitive fire. And my mindset is, you know, you do that, you do whatever. But at the end of the game, I still think you shake hands, good game. And I think that metaphorically speaking, I think that's kind of what Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are doing right now. Like, they're like, listen, like, we respect each other. You know, it's just heat of the moment. Things happen. Your competitive fire gets going. And I get it. I understand it. You know, I don't really personally see a problem with it. So that'll do it for this week's episode of the Big Blue Sports Podcast. I want to thank everybody who makes this show possible, as well as everybody who tunes in. NPR is next. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon. Have a good one.